This is Shelley Craft coming to you live on SNNLive. We're at the second annual Growth Capital Expo in Las Vegas 2015. I have with me Bill Schreier, Infrastructure Capital Advisors. It's a publicly traded company, and the symbol is AMZA. Bill, welcome to SNNLive.
Thank you, Shelley. It's really nice to be here.
It's good to have you.
Thank you.
Please tell our audience about AMZA.
Okay, well, AMZA is an actively managed ETF. Actively managed ETFs have become quite popular in the last several years, and we are the first actively managed ETF based around high-quality midstream MLPs, master limited partnerships.
So that's oil and gas. Tell me anything else you cover in there?
It is oil and gas related, but the midstream MLP businesses on which we focus tend to be toll road type businesses. In other words, they simply transport, process, and store the oil and gas commodities. They don't actually take ownership of it. So these businesses are much more like a cash flow generation to use their facilities, the pipelines, the transportation, and so forth.
Oh. So let me see if I get this. In a market like this, where there's so much supply, your companies in the ETF that you're putting money into must be making a lot of money because there's a lot of oil being stored. Am I on target?
Well, that's one important point, which is the value of storage certainly can go up in certain times. And quite recently, due to a phenomenon in the futures markets called contango, the value of storage assets has actually gone up. But most of the companies that we're referring to here in the midstream MLP space tend to operate under long-term contracts. So the variation in the price of oil and gas, they tend to be very insensitive to that. Instead, these are very predictable, steady businesses over the long haul.
So why MLPs as opposed to C corporations?
Okay, well, MLPs are, if you're familiar with them, are non-taxed entities. So they are not taxed at the business level, and the MLPs distribute a very healthy distribution to their MLP holders. Most of that distribution tends to be tax sheltered for a period of time. So, for example, the midstream MLPs that we invest in, on average, have about a yield right now of about 6.5%. And much of that yield is actually sheltered from current taxes. So it's very advantageous to retirees or other people who are looking for safety and security.
So why an ETF over any other form of investment?
Good point. There are many ways to invest in MLPs. One, of course, is you can invest in the MLP directly yourself. If you're familiar with that, you're taking individual stock risk, so you have to pick the right one or two. And in addition, you get a K1. A K1 is something that your tax accountant will get at the end of the year, and sometimes they find a bit burdensome. You could also invest, if you don't like that route, you can invest in closed-end funds. Closed-end funds based around MLPs. They tend to trade at a discount to their net asset value, which occasionally disturbs some investors. You can invest in an exchange-traded note, but there you're taking the credit risk of the bank that issues that note linked to MLPs. And then you can invest in passive ETFs. And until now, we've become the first first ETF based around MLPs that is active. And our theory of why an active MLP is more interesting is because we are able to change the weightings of the MLPs in our portfolio. We don't strictly have to follow the index. And so we can overweight and underweight slightly. We can use a small bit of leverage. And we do write covered call options against some of the positions in the portfolio. So right now we have an underlying yield of the MLPs in the portfolio of between around 6.5%, yet our fund yields about 9%.
That's a pretty good, nice yield.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. How do you project your revenue stream if someone comes in and invests in your ETF? That's tradable. They can come in and out as they please. So they grab capital gain from it. Am I correct?
Well, one thing that's interesting about our ETF is that investors get a 1099. So I may not have mentioned that earlier. It's very important because it means this particular ETF is easier for your accountants to deal with and is eligible to be purchased by an IRA or a foreigner, for example, all of which have problems buying a normal MLP. As far as projecting forward, we do very in-depth fundamental analysis of each MLP in the portfolio. Our firm's founder himself founded a publicly traded MLP and is very, very familiar with the space. And projecting forward, we do individual models on each of the companies in the portfolio, and we're able to project forward their cash flows and therefore their distributions, which will come to our shareholders.
How's your volume?
The volume, we've been trading for about 6 months on the New York Stock Exchange, and the volume is, I think we traded about 4,000 or 5,000 shares today so far. Mm-hmm. It varies a bit. We're fairly new, but I think as time goes on, and volumes will increase.
So for someone who wants to find out more information, where would you send them?
Well, we have a website for this particular ETF. It's infracapmlp.com.
So infracapmlp.com.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Schreier, Infrastructure Capital Advisors. The publicly traded symbol is AMZA. I'm Shelley Kraft. This is SNNLive, and we're coming to you live from the second annual Growth Capital Expo in Las Vegas, 2015. Bill?
Thank you, Shelley.
Thanks for coming to the
conference,
and thanks for coming on to SNNLive.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.